Eleanor Whitmore did not cry. Not when her fiancé turned his back on her. Not when her own father looked away. Not even when the entire congregation laughed as a man in a stable laborer's coat stepped forward and offered her his hand at the altar. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and took that hand without a single trembling breath. Because Eleanor Whitmore had learned one thing in 23 years of living in that house. Dignity was the only thing they could not take from her. If this story speaks to your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow Eleanor's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning of Eleanor Whitmore's wedding began the way most summer mornings did in Boston in the year of 1815, with the smell of salt air drifting off the harbor and the sound of church bells cutting clean through the heat. She had been awake since before dawn, not from nerves, not from excitement, from the particular kind of stillness that comes when a woman has been waiting so long for one good thing that she is afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to let herself believe it might actually arrive. Her wedding gown had been sewn by the most respected dressmaker in the colony. White cotton, high-necked with small pearl buttons running from her wrist to her elbow. It was not extravagant. Eleanor had asked for simple. She had learned not to ask for too much from the Whitmore household. She stood before the long mirror in the East guest room, not her childhood room, which had been reassigned to Charlotte 3 years prior, and looked at the woman staring back at her. She looked like someone who was about to be handed a future. She almost believed it. Governor Samuel Whitmore's house was a federal-style brick manor on Beacon Hill, the kind of home that announced itself before you reached the door. 3 stories, 6 columns, a circular drive where carriages lined up on social occasions, like soldiers at attention. On the morning of Eleanor's wedding, those carriages came early. Eleanor heard them from her window. The clip of hooves on cobblestone, the low murmur of guests who had known her since childhood. The Hawthorns, the Aldridges, the Pembrokes, people who had watched her grow up in the shadow of a stepmother who wore kindness like a costume she only put on in company. She heard Charlotte's voice carrying from the main hall, bright and effortless, the way everything was effortless for Charlotte. "It's such a warm morning. I do hope Eleanor doesn't wilt." Laughter followed, the kind that landed like a small deliberate cut. Eleanor turned away from the window. She picked up her gloves and went downstairs. Margaret Whitmore, stepmother, mistress of the house, architect of every social occasion for the past 15 years, was standing at the foot of the staircase when Eleanor descended. Margaret was a handsome woman. Everyone said so. Controlled in the way that expensive clocks are controlled, precise ornamental wound very tightly. She looked at Eleanor the way she always looked at Eleanor, as though Eleanor were a problem that had not yet been fully resolved. "You're pale," Margaret said. "I slept well, thank you," Eleanor replied. "Your hair needs attention." "Mary already attended to it." Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Aldridge family is in the front parlor. Try not to say anything political. Your opinions are unsuitable for mixed company." "Good morning to you as well, Margaret," Eleanor said, and walked past her into the parlor. It was the kind of small defiance Eleanor had perfected over years, not loud enough to punish, not quiet enough to ignore. She had learned to exist in that narrow space. Richard Alden arrived at 9:30. He was 28th second son of the Alden shipping family, and he was considered a very good match. Not because he was particularly kind or particularly interesting, but because he was respectable, moderately handsome, and his family had land that adjoined the Whitmore Northern Holdings in a way that Governor Whitmore found financially convenient. Eleanor had not chosen Richard because she loved him. She had chosen him because she was 23 years old, and in Boston's colonial society. In 1815-23 was the last year a woman could still select, rather than accept. After that, the world did the selecting for you. She liked Richard well enough. He was not cruel. He remembered her preferences occasionally. Once in the garden, he had brought her a small book of American verse without being asked, and she had thought briefly carefully that perhaps this would be enough. Perhaps enough was the most she was going to get. She was coming to terms with that, or she had been. Teg, The procession to the Old South Meeting House took 40 minutes by carriage. Eleanor rode with her father. Governor Samuel Whitmore was a large man, white-haired with the careful, weathered face of someone who had spent decades calculating when to speak and when to stay silent. He had been calculating for so long that Eleanor was no longer certain he knew how to do anything else. He had not been unkind to her. That was the thing people didn't understand about Samuel Whitmore. He was never deliberately cruel. He simply found it easier to love the things that required less of him. Charlotte was easy. Charlotte laughed at his jokes and dressed beautifully and never brought complicated subjects to breakfast. Eleanor brought complicated subjects to breakfast. The carriage moved through the summer streets. Her father adjusted his cuffs twice the way he did when he was uncomfortable. "You look well," he said finally. "Thank you, Father." "The Aldens are good people." "Yes." "Richard is a steady man." "So you've said." He looked at her. Something moved across his face, something almost like regret, and then he looked away again, out the carriage window, and Eleanor watched Boston pass by, and said nothing more. The Old South Meeting House was full. Eleanor stepped out of the carriage and into the summer heat and the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, and she walked up those stone steps with her head level and her hands folded and her heart doing something complicated and fast inside her chest. She was almost to the door when she heard Charlotte's voice. "Eleanor?" She turned. Charlotte was standing just inside the entrance, already positioned in a way that made her look accidental and arranged at the same time. She was wearing pale blue, a color that made her dark hair luminous, and her skin glow, and she was smiling the smile that Eleanor had spent years learning to translate. That smile meant, "I have already won." Eleanor had not yet understood what she was losing. "You look lovely," Charlotte said. "Truly. The white is very classic." "Thank you, Charlotte. I hope the day goes exactly as you've planned." Charlotte tilted her head slightly. "You've worked so hard for this." She walked past Eleanor into the church, and Eleanor stood there for half a second, holding the word planned in her chest like a splinter. Then she followed. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. Eleanor stood at the back of the aisle, her father beside her, the organ filling the high-ceilinged room with something dignified and ancient, and she looked up toward the altar, where Richard Alden was supposed to be standing. He was there. But he was not alone. Charlotte was standing beside him. Not as a guest, not as a family member observing from a pew. She was standing beside Richard at the altar, in the way that women stand when they have claimed something, and Richard was not looking at the back of the church where Eleanor stood. He was looking at Charlotte. The organ played on for 3 more seconds before it faltered, then stopped. The silence that replaced it was total. Eleanor did not move. She heard the first whisper from somewhere to her left, then another, then the particular rustle of 200 people turning in their seats to watch the same thing with varying degrees of horror and satisfaction. Her father's hand resting beneath her arm in escort went rigid. "Samuel!" Margaret's voice came from the front pew, composed, almost musical. "I believe we should proceed." Governor Whitmore made a sound, not a word, a sound, and then he did nothing. Eleanor understood in that moment with perfect, terrible clarity that he was not going to do anything. That he had known perhaps not everything, perhaps not the precise details, but that something had shifted in the Whitmore house in recent weeks, and he had chosen not to see it, and that choice had just become her entire life. She was still standing in the aisle of the Old South Meeting House in her white wedding gown, and the man at the altar was not waiting for her. Richard cleared his throat. He began, and then stopped. He looked, Eleanor thought, genuinely uncomfortable, which she supposed was something. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Eleanor," he said finally, "I owe you an explanation." "You owe her a great deal more than that," said a voice from the back of the church. Everyone turned. Standing in the open doorway, the light from the summer street behind him, cutting a long shadow across the stone floor, was a man no one in that church recognized. He was tall and broad through the shoulder, and he wore the clothes of a working man: rough linen worn boots, a coat that had seen outdoor work and weather. He held his hat in both hands in front of him, and he did not look like he had wandered into the wrong building. He looked like he had walked precisely where he intended to go. The whispers erupted. "Who is that? Is that a laborer? Did someone's stable hand follow them to church?" Laughter flickered through the pews. Not all of it, but enough. The nervous kind, the cruel kind, the kind that fills a silence when cruelty is easier than discomfort. Charlotte's voice rose above it, clear and carrying and perfectly pitched. "Well," she said with a smile like a drawn blade, "it appears even Eleanor has found someone willing to take her." The laughter spread. Eleanor heard it, every note of it. It moved through her the way cold water moves, first the shock of it, then the settling weight, then the strange clarifying stillness underneath. She turned to look at the man in the doorway. He was not laughing. He stood completely still in the middle of all that laughter, and he looked at her, not with pity, not with amusement, with something that Eleanor could not immediately name. She would name it later, much later. It was respect. She did not decide it consciously. She did not make a plan or calculate an outcome or consult the list of sensible options. She was not in that moment a governor's daughter or a jilted woman or a cautionary tale for Boston's social season. She was a woman who had been very still for a very long time, and something in her had finally quietly chosen to move. Eleanor Whitmore walked back down the aisle. The congregation shifted and murmured as she passed. She heard her stepmother's voice, a sharp, low syllable that might have been her name, and she did not stop. She walked to the back of the church. She stood in front of the man in the worn coat. Up close, she could see that he was perhaps 30, with dark eyes and a face that had been weathered by work and sun, and something else, something internal, like old and settled knowledge. He smelled of horses and wood smoke, and he was holding his hat in both hands, and he was watching her with the focused attention of someone who was ready for whatever came next. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "I know who you are, miss," he said. His voice was low measured. The vowels were not from Boston. Somewhere further west maybe, or somewhere that hadn't gone soft with drawing rooms yet. "And you are," she said. He paused. Something moved briefly in his expression. A hesitation small and deliberate, the kind a man makes when he is choosing between two different true things and settling on the one that costs him less right now. "Nathaniel Graves," he said. "I work land, horses mostly." Behind her, the church had not recovered its silence. She could feel the weight of every eye in that room pressed against her back like a hand. She could hear Charlotte's murmured commentary, finding its audience. She looked at Nathaniel Graves. "Mr. Graves," she said, "I find myself in need of a choice." He waited. "I can walk back into that church," she said, "and spend the rest of my life explaining myself to people who have already decided what I'm worth. Or I can walk out of it. A beat." "I'm walking out," she said. "I'd rather not do it alone." Something shifted in Nathaniel Graves' expression. Not surprise. Closer to recognition, the particular recognition of someone who has been in a position where pride and practicality have to be weighed in the same hand and has learned how that weighing feels. He offered her his arm. Not dramatically, not with performance. He simply extended his arm the way a man offers a steadying hand at the edge of something steep. "Then let's go, Miss Whitmore," he said. She took his arm, and they walked out of the Old South Meeting House together, into the summer heat of Boston, 1815. While behind them, the congregation erupted into a noise that was half scandal and half something uglier. The street outside was bright and ordinary. Pigeons on the cobblestones, a cart horse standing patient at the corner. The smell of bread from somewhere nearby. Eleanor walked beside Nathaniel Graves, and she did not look back at the church, and the world went on around them, the way the world always does, indifferent and continuous, and entirely unbothered by the wreckage being made of one woman's mourning. "Where are you headed?" Nathaniel asked. He had not released her arm, but he was not holding it possessively, more the way a good horse paces alongside something smaller, present stable, not crowding. "I don't know," Eleanor said honestly. He nodded as though this was a reasonable answer. I've got a property, he said. About 40 minutes east. Nothing grand, but it's clean and there's room. You're offering me shelter. I'm offering you an option, he said. What you do with it is yours to decide. Eleanor looked at him sideways. This man with his working clothes and his Western vowels and his steady, careful hands. Why? She said. He thought about it for a moment. Not the kind of thinking that searches for an answer. The kind that tests one to make sure it's true before speaking it. Because nobody laughs at a person like that, he said quietly, and gets to be right about them. Eleanor said nothing. They walked on. The rumors reached Beacon Hill before Eleanor did. By afternoon, the story had taken on the particular momentum of Boston scandal, elaborated and reshaped by each retelling, until it had grown into something almost mythological. Eleanor Whitmore had abandoned her own wedding. Eleanor Whitmore had walked out on the Alden family. Eleanor Whitmore had left with a stable hand. Can you imagine a man no one knew in work clothes at a church? Margaret Whitmore received visitors in the front parlor and deployed her most refined expressions of concern. Eleanor has always been high-spirited, she told Mrs. Pembroke with a sigh precisely calculated to convey loving exasperation. We can only hope she comes to her senses. Charlotte sat beside her mother and said nothing which was unusual. Charlotte generally had something to say, but she sat with her hands folded and looked at the middle distance and allowed a small satisfied curve to rest at the corner of her mouth. Governor Samuel Whitmore closed himself in his study. He did not come out for dinner. The property Nathaniel Graves drove her to was a modest white farmhouse, set back from a dirt road in a stretch of countryside that Boston's social world had not yet found occasion to care about. It was simple. Exactly as he had said, nothing grand. A kitchen garden that was genuinely tended, a stable with 3 horses, a porch with 2 chairs slightly uneven the way hand-built things are. Eleanor stood in the yard and looked at it. It's not what you're used to, Nathaniel said. No, she agreed. It's better. He looked at her sharply. She wasn't sure if he believed her. She wasn't entirely sure she'd meant it as a compliment. But standing there in the afternoon heat in a wedding dress that no longer meant anything, looking at a quiet house that no one was performing inside of Eleanor. Whitmore breathed for what felt like the first time in years. The guest room is on the north side, Nathaniel said. Cooler in summer. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Once took the horse's bridle and walked toward the stable. He did not ask her questions. He did not offer opinions. He did not watch her to see how she was managing. He simply gave her the yard and the quiet and the north-facing room with its good summer air. And Eleanor, who had spent 23 years surrounded by people who could not stop managing her, stood in the middle of that ordinary yard and felt something she did not immediately know how to hold. It felt like space. It felt distantly and dangerously like something she might eventually call peace. That evening, Nathaniel Graves made a plain meal salt pork and boiled potatoes and cornbread from a skillet and set it on the table without ceremony. And Eleanor sat across from him in the low evening light and ate without speaking, and thought about the day that had taken everything she thought she was owed, and replaced it with something she could not yet name. Outside, the summer dark settled over the countryside. Inside, 2 strangers sat in a quiet kitchen and ate a quiet meal. And somewhere behind them, Boston talked. What Boston did not know, what Eleanor did not know, what even the judge in the neighboring county and the senator who had once shaken Nathaniel Graves's hand at a land registry office and stepped back with something too close to deference to be coincidence. What none of them understood yet was what kind of man was sitting across that plain table, what name he carried, what he had walked away from, and what in the quiet of 40 acres and a modest white farmhouse he had been carefully, deliberately waiting to decide. The morning after Eleanor Whitmore slept in a stranger's house, she woke before dawn and lay still for a long moment listening. No carriages, no servants moving through hallways, no Margaret's voice issuing instructions to someone below. Just birdsong, and the distant sound of a horse shifting in a stable, and the particular silence of a place that had nothing to prove. She stared at the ceiling and thought, "This is what I chose." Then she got up, because Eleanor Whitmore had never been a woman who stayed horizontal when there was something to face. She found the kitchen already warm. A fire had been laid. A pot of water hung over it, beginning to steam. On the table, someone had left a small pitcher of milk and a cloth-covered plate of cornbread from the night before. Nathaniel Graves was not in the house. She could hear him outside, the rhythm of axe on wood, steady and unhurried, the sound of a man working through something with his hands, the way some men work through things in their heads. Eleanor poured water into a cup and stood at the kitchen window and watched him without meaning to. He worked without performance, no wasted motion, no looking around to see if anyone was watching. Just the work and the morning and the clean mechanical logic of it. She had grown up surrounded by men who performed everything, who entered rooms and made speeches of themselves, who sat at tables and made theater of opinion. Nathaniel Graves chopped wood the way he had offered her his arm the day before, without drama, without asking for anything back. She did not know what to do with that, so she drank her water and decided to be useful. By the time Nathaniel came in for breakfast, Eleanor had reheated the cornbread, found a crock of preserves in the pantry, and set the table with the plain efficiency of someone who had spent years doing domestic labor that no one in her social circle would have acknowledged she knew how to do. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He ate. He did not comment on the food or the setting or the fact that a governor's daughter had served him breakfast in his own kitchen. He treated it as a simple, ordinary thing, and Eleanor found to her surprise that she was grateful for that more than almost anything he could have said. "I'll need to go into town today," she said. "I have things at the house, clothes, books. I can take you." "I'd rather go alone." He looked at her steadily. "That'll be hard." "Yes," she said. "I know." A pause. He set down his fork. "Eleanor." He used her name without the title, without ceremony, the way people use names when they mean them. "Boston's going to have opinions." "Boston always has opinions," she said. "I've been the subject of them my entire life. I'm familiar with the experience." Something moved in his jaw, not quite a smile, not quite anything she could catalog yet. "All right," he said. "Take the bay mare. She's steady." Eleanor took the bay mare. She rode into Boston on a Tuesday morning in July in a borrowed riding coat 2 sizes too large for her, and she held her head exactly as she had learned to hold it in the Whitmore household level-forward expression, composed into something neither warm nor cold. And she did not look at the people on the street who looked at her. She felt them, though. The way you feel weather before it arrives. The first one to speak was Mrs. Aldridge, who was stepping out of a milliner's shop on Federal Street and nearly walked directly into the mayor's path. "Eleanor!" The woman stopped. Her face went through 4 expressions in under 2 seconds. "My goodness, we didn't know if you were, that is to say, there has been some concern." "Good morning, Mrs. Aldridge," Eleanor said pleasantly. "You look well. Where are you staying? Does your father know where you are?" "My father knows a great many things," Eleanor said. "Good day." She rode on. The Whitmore house on Beacon Hill was exactly as she had left it, which was strange because she felt entirely different from the woman who had left it yesterday in a white dress and a carriage. The columns were the same. The circular drive was the same. The brass knocker that she had touched 10,000 times was the same. She did not knock. She had a key. She had lived there. She let herself in. The front hall was empty, but she could hear voices from the parlor. Margaret's and another woman's, and the particular performance quality that Margaret's voice took on when she was managing a social situation. Eleanor walked past the parlor without stopping. She went upstairs. She went to the east guest room because her own room no longer held her things. She packed methodically. 2 dresses, her wool cloak, the book of American verse, her mother's small jewelry case, which Margaret had tried to reassign to Charlotte twice, and which Eleanor had each time quietly retrieved. A hairbrush, 2 pairs of gloves, the writing materials she kept in the desk drawer. She was tying the second bag when Charlotte appeared in the doorway. Charlotte was wearing rose muslin and a carefully constructed expression of concern. "Eleanor," she said. "You came back." "I came to collect my things," Eleanor said. She did not stop packing. "We were worried." Eleanor looked up at that. She let the silence sit for a moment. "Were you?" she said. Charlotte shifted. "Mother thinks you've made a terrible mistake." "Mother thinks any decision she didn't make is a mistake." "Eleanor, where did you and Richard meet?" Eleanor said. She kept her voice even. She was genuinely curious in the way you are curious about the mechanics of something that has already done its damage. "Was it recent? Or has this been arranged for some time?" Charlotte's expression flickered. The concerned costume slipped just slightly, revealing something underneath that was sharper and more honest. "Richard and I have an understanding," Charlotte said. "We've had one for several months. It wasn't meant to be done in public," Eleanor said. "I understand. That part wasn't planned." "You were never going to be happy with him," Charlotte said, and her voice shifted into something that sounded almost like conviction. "You know that. You and Richard had nothing in common. He was a practical match, and you know it." "He was my practical match," Eleanor said, "to make with my own eyes open in my own time." "I did you a favor." "Charlotte." Eleanor pulled the bag shut. She turned and looked at her half-sister fully directly the way she rarely allowed herself to. "I don't need you to decide what favors I require. I never did. And I don't need your mother's opinion about my choices or my father's silence or Richard Alden's conscience. I need my things. And I have them now." She picked up both bags. Charlotte stepped aside. Eleanor walked out. She was at the top of the stairs when her father's voice came from below. "Eleanor." She stopped. Governor Samuel Whitmore was standing at the foot of the stairs looking up at her. He looked older than he had yesterday. Or perhaps she was simply seeing him differently now from this particular angle with this particular weight in her hands. "You don't have to leave," he said. "I've already left," she said. "This is me collecting what's mine." "That man," he began. "His name is Nathaniel Graves," she said. "He showed me more dignity yesterday in 10 minutes than this house has managed in 10 years. I'll be fine." Her father opened his mouth, closed it. Eleanor came down the stairs, walked past him, and let herself out the front door. She did not look back, but her hands gripping the bags were shaking by the time she reached the mare. She stood there a moment, head down, breathing, letting the shaking move through her and pass. Then she tied the bags mounted and rode east. She did not cry until she was well clear of Beacon Hill in a stretch of open road where there was no one to see her. And even then it was brief and quiet, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand and kept riding. She was not crying for Richard Alden. She was crying for the version of herself who had stood at the top of those stairs for 23 years, waiting for her father to choose her. She let that version go somewhere in the middle of that summer road. She rode on. By the time the white farmhouse came into view, she had stopped shaking entirely. Nathaniel was in the yard, working a young horse on a long line, moving in slow circles with the patient economy of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He looked up when she rode in. He did not ask how it went. He read her face the way men read weather, and simply said, "I'll take the mare," and held out his hand for the reins. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and meant it for more than the horse. He nodded once and led both animals toward the stable. Eleanor carried her bags inside and thought, "This is what I have now. This house. These bags. This man I do not know." And then she thought, it is enough to begin with. She was wrong about how quickly the outside world would leave her alone. Within a week, the social pressure arrived in a more organized form. Mrs. Pembroke came first under the guise of Christian concern and stood at the farmhouse gate with 2 other women from the parish and spoke in carrying tones about Eleanor's welfare, her reputation, her father's grief. Eleanor received her on the porch and offered water and declined every implication and sent the women away no wiser than they arrived. A letter came from Margaret very formally worded, suggesting that Eleanor's current situation reflected poorly on the Whitmore family name, and that the family would be willing to receive Eleanor back quietly if certain conditions were met. Eleanor read the letter twice, fed it to the kitchen fire, and went back to the garden where she had started spending her mornings. A second letter came from Richard Alden, which surprised her. It was shorter than Margaret's and considerably more honest. He said he was sorry. He said he had been a coward. He said he hoped she was safe. Eleanor read this one 3 times. She did not burn it. She put it in the writing desk and left it there, and did not answer it because she did not yet know what she wanted to say, and she had learned that silence was often better than a reply assembled from the wrong feelings. What she had not expected was how quickly the farmhouse began to feel like hers. Not because Nathaniel gave it to her. He didn't. He didn't give her anything in particular, which was itself a kind of gift. He gave her room. He treated her like someone capable of deciding how she wanted to spend her own hours, which was more radical than it sounds when you have spent your entire life in a house where every hour was already assigned. She gardened in the mornings. She read in the afternoons. She began cautiously to help with meals, and Nathaniel accepted this without ceremony or excessive gratitude, which she appreciated enormously. Excessive gratitude always made her feel like a visitor. He treated her like a person who lived there, and so gradually she began to. In the evenings they sometimes talked. Not much at first. A question here, an answer there, the careful architecture of 2 people learning each other's conversational habits. Eleanor had grown up in a house where conversation was a social instrument, deployed strategically, shaped for effect, aimed at a result. Nathaniel talked the way he worked, directly and only when he had something to say. "You grew up in Boston?" he asked one evening without looking up from the bridle he was mending. "On Beacon Hill," she said. "My mother died when I was 4. My father remarried when I was 6. "And that went well," he said. Not a question. "Margaret is a very efficient woman," Eleanor said. "She runs a household the way generals run campaigns. There's no chaos, no loose ends, everything in its place." "Including you." "Including me." She paused. "Except I was always the wrong shape for the place she assigned me." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I know something about being the wrong shape for an assigned place," he said. She looked at him. He did not look up from the bridle. She wanted to ask what he meant. She decided not to. Not yet. There was a texture to the way he said it. Careful, compressed, like a man carrying something he had packed very tightly. And she had learned enough about that kind of careful compression to know that pushing on it before it was ready served no one. So she let it go. But she remembered it. The first time Eleanor saw something she could not explain, it was 3 weeks after she arrived. A man rode in from the county road on a well-kept horse, not a laborer's horse, she noted. The kind of horse that costs money, and he came into the yard, and he asked for Nathaniel by name. Nathaniel came out of the stable, and the man handed him an envelope. And then, and this was the part Eleanor could not quite reconcile, the man touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. The way men touch their hats to someone they respect. Not to a stable hand. Not to a working man in linen and worn boots. To someone else. Nathaniel took the envelope, said something short and low that Eleanor couldn't hear, and the man rode away. Nathaniel put the envelope in his coat pocket without opening it. He went back into the stable. He did not mention it. Eleanor mentioned it that evening. "Who was that man today?" she said. Nathaniel looked up from his plate. "A man I know. He rode a good horse. He does well for himself. He tipped his hat to you," Eleanor said, "like you were someone." Nathaniel's jaw moved almost imperceptibly. "People are polite. People are polite to their equals," Eleanor said. "People are differential to someone above them. That man was being differential." Nathaniel set down his fork. He looked at her with a steadiness that she was beginning to recognize as his version of careful thought. The look of a man selecting his words, The way you select your footing on uncertain ground. Eleanor, he said, I told you who I am. You told me what you do, she said. That's not the same thing. A beat of silence. No? He said. I suppose it isn't. He picked up his fork again. He ate. He did not say anything more. Eleanor watched him and said nothing more either. But something had shifted in the house. Not visibly, not dramatically. The way the temperature of a room shifts when a door opens somewhere else in the building, and you feel the change before you understand its source. The second incident came 10 days later. She had ridden into the village for provisions she had taken on this task by mutual and unspoken agreement because she was a better negotiator than Nathaniel, who paid whatever was asked without argument, in a way that Eleanor found simultaneously admirable and financially reckless. And in the dry goods store she encountered Harriet Aldridge, who was young and not particularly unkind, but who was also, unfortunately, very connected to Boston's information network. Eleanor, Harriet said with genuine surprise, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm buying flour, Eleanor said pleasantly. Of course. Are you... How are you? We've heard, Harriet lowered her voice. People are saying you're living out at the Graves property. I am. Harriet looked distressed on her behalf. Eleanor, that man, do you know anything about him, where he's from? Because nobody seems to, he arrived here, 2 years ago, and nobody knows anything, and he keeps to himself. And some people say, what do people say? Eleanor asked. Well, Harriet leaned in. Mr. Pembroke was in the county seat last spring on land business, and he says one of the judges there, Judge Carver, the senior one, when he heard the Graves name, he went very quiet. And then he asked if it was the same Graves family from Virginia. And when Pembroke said he didn't know the judge, he said to tell Mr. Graves that his business was still on record, still intact. Harriet shook her head. What does that mean, Eleanor? I don't know, Eleanor said. And that was the truth. She bought the flour and rode home and sat with that information for the rest of the afternoon, turning it over the way you turn over a stone that seems ordinary, but is slightly the wrong weight. That evening, she said nothing about it, but she watched Nathaniel across the dinner table, and she thought about Judge Carver going quiet. She thought about the man on the good horse. She thought about the envelope that had gone unopened into a coat pocket, as if its contents were already known. She thought about what a man looks like when he is carrying a secret that is larger than the life he is pretending to live. She thought, I know what that looks like. I have been doing it myself for years. She was washing dishes when it happened, the thing she had not been prepared for. Nathaniel came into the kitchen and picked up a cloth and began drying the plates. She sat down, which he did sometimes without comment, the way he did many small domestic things without comment. And they were standing side by side at the kitchen table when he said very quietly, My mother died in the spring. Eleanor stopped. I'm sorry, she said. She was in Virginia. He set the dried plate on the stack. I didn't go back. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. Because going back means other things. Things I'm not ready for yet. Eleanor turned and looked at him. He was looking at the plate in his hands. His face was in that moment simply a man's face, not composed or careful or performing anything at all. Just a face with loss in it, and the particular strain of carrying that loss alone. Nathaniel, she said, whatever you're carrying. She stopped, started again. You don't have to carry it out of my sight. That's all I mean. He looked at her, and for just a moment, one unguarded, genuine moment, the steadiness he wore like a coat fell away, and Eleanor saw something underneath it that was simply human and tired and a long way from whatever home he had left. It's not a small thing, he said. I didn't ask for small, she said. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. 4. Then he set the plate down, folded the cloth, and said, I'll check on the horses, and walked out. Eleanor stood at the kitchen table and listened to the door close and thought whatever he is carrying it is enormous. And he has been carrying it alone for a very long time. She was beginning to understand that the question was not whether Nathaniel Graves had secrets. The question was whether she was ready for what those secrets might require of her, because the other thing Eleanor Whitmore was beginning to understand slowly, reluctantly, with the particular resistance of a woman who had been burned enough times to distrust warmth, was that in 40 acres of quiet and plain meals and evenings by the fire, something was happening to her that she had not planned for. She was beginning to trust him. Not his words. Not his explanations, which were always partial and careful and slightly too composed to be accidental. She was beginning to trust the man himself, the consistency of him, the way he worked, the way he listened, the way he never once in 6 weeks made her feel like a burden or a charity case or a social problem that needed resolving. The way he had said, "Nobody laughs at a person like that," and gets to be right about them, and then lived that sentence every single day since. She was beginning to trust him. And that terrified her more than any secret he might be carrying. Because Eleanor Whitmore had trusted the Whitmore house for 23 years, and she knew exactly what the inside of a beautiful thing looked like when it was built on something false. She was standing in the garden the following week when a rider came down the county road and slowed at the farm gate. Not a local man. The horse was too fine, the coat too well cut for county work. He had the bearing of a man accustomed to being received rather than arriving. And when he opened the gate and rode into the yard, he looked around with the assessing eye of someone cataloging what he saw. He found Nathaniel at the fence line. Eleanor from the garden watched the moment they saw each other. Nathaniel went very still. The rider dismounted, and then he said loudly enough for Eleanor to hear across the yard, "Nathaniel, your brother's been asking for you. The estate won't wait much longer." The word landed in the summer air like a stone dropped into still water. Estate. Nathaniel said something low and sharp that Eleanor couldn't catch. The rider glanced in her direction. Nathaniel said something else. The rider looked back at him, then made a short, almost reluctant bow. A bow Eleanor noted, the kind a man makes to an acknowledged superior, and remounted. He rode out the gate without looking back. Nathaniel stood at the fence line for a long moment. Then he turned. He saw Eleanor standing in the garden. He saw that she had heard. Something crossed his face, complicated, layered, the expression of a man who has been managing a situation and has just watched the management fail. Eleanor set down the garden basket. She walked toward him across the yard. She stopped 6 feet away. "Estate," she said. He said nothing. "Your brother," she said. Still nothing. "Nathaniel." Her voice was quiet. It was the same voice she had used in the Whitmore kitchen the morning she packed her bags, controlled level, covering something much larger underneath. "I have spent my entire life in a house where people knew things they didn't tell me. I am not going to do that again. Not here." He looked at her. That look that was not composure, but the effort required to maintain it. "I know," he said. "Then tell me something true," she said. "One thing. You don't have to tell me everything. Just tell me one true thing." A long pause. The summer afternoon held them both in it, still and warm and waiting. Nathaniel Graves looked at Eleanor Whitmore and said quietly, "The property we are standing on is not the only property my family holds." She held his gaze. "How much property?" she said. He didn't answer. She looked at his face and the careful shape of his silence, and at the rider disappearing down the county road, and she did the arithmetic slowly and precisely, the way she had always been able to do arithmetic when the numbers mattered. "Nathaniel," she said, "how much property?" He looked away toward the road. "Enough," he said, "that I left it." Eleanor stood in the yard and felt the ground shift under her, not literally, but in the way that it does when you discover that the solid thing you have been standing on is larger and stranger than it appeared, and you cannot yet tell whether it is safer to know that or more dangerous. She picked up her garden basket. She walked back into the house. She put the kettle on the fire and sat at the kitchen table and thought about everything she knew and everything she didn't. And outside, the summer light moved across the yard, and Nathaniel Graves stood at the fence line for a long time before he finally turned and followed her in. He sat across from her. Neither of them spoke. The kettle began to steam. And Eleanor Whitmore thought, whatever is coming, I am not ready for it. But she had not been ready for any of it, and she had survived every bit of it so far. She poured the tea. She pushed a cup toward him. He took it. And between them in that kitchen, in the warmth and the silence, something that neither of them had named yet continued quietly and steadily to grow. The tea had gone cold before either of them moved. That was how it was between Eleanor and Nathaniel, now not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted. Like a conversation that had been started and not finished, left sitting on the table between them, the way that cold cup sat, neither of them quite ready to pick it up again, and neither of them willing to throw it out. The word estate had not left the room. It lived in the walls now, in the floorboards, in the particular quality of silence that fell when Nathaniel came in from outside, and Eleanor looked up from her book, and they both knew they were not talking about the thing they were both thinking about. 3 days passed like that. On the 4th day, Eleanor stopped waiting for him to explain and decided to watch instead. She was a precise observer. She had learned to be growing up in the Whitmore house, where what was said and what was meant were almost never the same thing. You survived that kind of household by reading the space between words, by watching hands and eyes and the set of a jaw, rather than listening to the actual sentences. So she watched. She watched the way Nathaniel read his letters, standing always, standing, never sitting, as though sitting implied a comfort he hadn't decided to allow himself. She watched how he folded them after and put them not in a drawer or a box, but in the inside pocket of his coat close to his chest, the way men carry documents they cannot afford to lose. She watched how he spoke to his horses quietly, specifically using their names, with the casual affection of someone who has learned that patience is a more reliable tool than authority. She watched the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. That was the thing she had not expected to notice. She had expected to catch him guarded or calculating, or performing the role of simple working man with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it long enough for it to become reflex. Instead, she caught him looking at her with an expression that had no performance in it at all. Something quiet and undefended. Something that looked in the moments before he remembered to arrange his face almost like longing. She filed this away and said nothing. On the 5th day, Nathaniel came to breakfast and set an envelope on the table in front of her. Not handed it to her. Set it down and stepped back and stood by the window with his arms crossed and looked out at the yard. She looked at the envelope. Her name was on it in a handwriting she recognized immediately. Richard Alden. "It came yesterday," Nathaniel said. "I should have given it to you then." Eleanor picked it up. "Why didn't you?" He didn't answer. She looked at him. He was still looking at the yard. "Nathaniel." "I thought about not giving it to you at all," he said flatly without looking at her. "I want to be honest about that." Eleanor held the envelope. The admission settled in the room between them, uncomfortably true. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you said you didn't want to live in a house where people knew things and didn't tell you." He turned from the window then and looked at her directly. "I'm trying to be the kind of man who honors that, even when I don't like what it requires." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she opened the envelope. Richard's letter was longer this time. 3 pages, which surprised her, because Richard Alden was not a man inclined to 3 pages of anything. He wrote that Charlotte had told him Eleanor had returned to the house on Beacon Hill and collected her things. He wrote that he had heard she was living at a farm east of the city with a man no one seemed to know much about. He wrote that he was concerned for her welfare. He wrote, and this was the sentence Eleanor read twice, that if she found herself in a position where she wished to reconsider the matter of the wedding, could be revisited quietly with discretion if certain difficulties had been resolved. Eleanor set the letter down. "He's offering to take you back," Nathaniel said. He had been watching her face. "He's offering to reconsider me," Eleanor said, "in his discretion, if my difficulties have been resolved." She paused. "I believe he means you." Nathaniel said nothing. "He thinks you're a problem I've acquired," Eleanor said, "one that might be managed." "He might be right," Nathaniel said very quietly. "About the problem part." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk about yourself that way, in my presence." She folded the letter back into the envelope. "You offered me your arm when no one else in that room would look at me. Whatever else you are or aren't, that is the first true thing I know about you. and I won't have it diminished." Nathaniel looked at her. That undefended look again, the one he hadn't learned to hide from her yet. She handed the envelope back to him. "Burn it, please. I won't be answering." He took it. She went to the garden. It was the most honest 10 minutes they had shared since the kitchen table, and the cold tea, and Eleanor carried it with her through the morning, the way you carry a thing that has weight, but not burden. Something solid, something real, something that tells you the ground is still under your feet. The county gathering was announced the following week. It was the kind of social occasion that the county used to organize itself. Land business political discussion, the management of disputes that required witnesses. A reasonable gathering at the Halcott estate, which was the largest private property in the county, and hosted these things twice a year, with the assurance of a family that had been doing it long enough to consider it a civic function rather than a social performance. Nathaniel did not mention going. Eleanor mentioned it first. "The Halcott gathering," she said over dinner. "Are you going?" He was quiet for a beat too long. "I generally don't attend," he said. "Why not?" Another pause. "It's complicated." "Most things are," she said. "That doesn't answer the question." He set down his fork. "Eleanor, if you say my name in that particular tone one more time instead of actually answering me," she said pleasantly, "I am going to start asking the questions in writing so you can't avoid them by looking out the window." Something broke open in his expression. Not quite a laugh. Close enough. "I'll go," he said. "Good," she said. "So will I." The morning of the Halcott gathering, Eleanor wore her second-best dress, the deep blue wool which was too warm for July, but was the most authoritative thing she owned, and she dressed her own hair with more precision than usual, and came downstairs to find Nathaniel in the front room, in a coat she had not seen before. She stopped. It was a well-made coat. Not extravagant, not ostentatious, but cut with a precision that spoke of someone who had known, at some point in his life, what good tailoring looked like, and had not entirely left it behind. He was standing by the window reading something, and when he heard her on the stairs, he looked up and put the paper in his pocket with the practiced speed of someone folding a thought away. "You look different," Eleanor said. "It's a coat," he said. "It's a very good coat," she said. "For a man who works horses." He said nothing. She decided not to push it. Not this morning. They rode to the Halcott estate together, and the first thing Eleanor noticed was not the gathering itself, but the moment they arrived. The yard was full of horses and carriages, men talking in groups, women arranging themselves on the wide porch. The general organized noise of county society assembling itself. And then, in the particular way that sound changes when a room notices something, a ripple moved through the nearest group of men. Not a loud ripple. A quiet one. The kind that happens when someone is recognized. A man in a dark jacket turned, looked at Nathaniel, and stopped mid-sentence. He recovered quickly. He finished his sentence. But Eleanor had seen the stop. She filed it. The gathering moved inside. It was a large formal room, arranged for business chairs, set in a broad horseshoe, the county magistrate at the head, a clerk at a small table. Land disputes, boundary reviews. A road commission question. The ordinary business of organized society. Eleanor sat beside Nathaniel and watched the room. 3 things happened in the next 2 hours that she catalogued with precise growing attention. The first, Judge Carver. The same Judge Carver whose name Harriet Aldridge had mentioned in the dry goods store entered late and took his seat across the horseshoe. Eleanor had not known he would be there. She watched him scan the room in the automatic way of experienced public men cataloging who was present. His scan reached Nathaniel and stopped. Not for long. A second, perhaps 2. Then he looked away. But his bearing changed fractionally, a minute straightening a slight realignment of attention, the way a man's bearing changes when he has registered something important and is being careful not to show it. The second, a piece of county business regarding a land boundary on the eastern road, came before the magistrate, and one of the parties, Mr. Hodges, red-faced, aggrieved, certain of himself, was making his case loudly and not entirely accurately. When Nathaniel said from his chair, without standing, without raising his voice, The survey record from 1808 would settle this. It's on file with the county clerk in the 3rd volume. The magistrate looked at him. Mr. Hodges looked at him. The clerk looked at him, then got up and went to a cabinet, and after a moment said, "He's right. 3rd volume. Survey record dated April of 1808. Mr. Hodges sat down. The magistrate said, "Thank you, Mr." and paused, and in that pause looked at Nathaniel with the expression of a man who is not certain how to complete a sentence he has just realized is more complicated than he intended. "Graves," Nathaniel said. "Mr. Graves." The magistrate nodded carefully. Eleanor watched all of it. The 3rd thing was the worst, or the most clarifying, depending on how you were reading it. At the close of the formal business, when the room broke into smaller conversation, Senator Hale, a thin, silver-haired man who represented the Northern District and whose name Eleanor had grown up hearing at her father's dinner table as a byword for political consequence, crossed the room. Not quickly. With the deliberate casualness of a man navigating toward a specific destination while appearing to simply circulate. He reached Nathaniel. He said quietly, with his back angled so the conversation was private, "I received your letter in the spring. I apologize for not responding. The timing there were complications." Nathaniel said equally quietly, "It's handled." "Your brother is handling his portion," Nathaniel said. "I've written to him." Senator Hale looked at him for a moment. Then he looked briefly at Eleanor. Something shifted in his expression, assessment recalibration. He looked back at Nathaniel. "I see," he said. "The situation has changed." "Several situations have," Nathaniel said. The senator looked at Eleanor once more, with the particular look of a man revising a calculation he thought was settled, and then he excused himself and moved away. Eleanor waited until they were outside and in the carriage and 3 minutes down the road before she spoke. "Senator Hale," she said. "I know him," Nathaniel said. "He knows you," Eleanor said. "That's different." She paused. "He referenced your letter, your brother. He said, 'The situation has changed.' He looked at me when he said it." Nathaniel watched the road. "Nathaniel." Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. Not anger exactly, but its quieter, more dangerous predecessor. "I am not a fool. I have watched you at that gathering for 2 hours, and I have watched that room respond to you in a way that has nothing to do with a man who works horses, and I am going to need you to tell me something real. Not one thing this time. Something real." The road moved under them. The summer afternoon pressed down on everything. "When I left Virginia," he said slowly, "I left a name." She waited. "The Graves family holds land in 4 counties," he said. "Political contracts going back to the previous generation. My father spent 30 years building it. When he died, it passed to my brother Edmund, and to me in equal shares." Eleanor felt the sentence land and spread through her chest the way cold water spreads. "Equal shares," she said. "Yes." "Of 4 counties." "The holdings, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "And you left it?" "I walked away from it," he said. 2 years ago. I came here because no one here knew the name. Because I wanted—" He stopped, started again. "I wanted to know what I was without it. Whether I was anything without it." Eleanor looked at the side of his face, the set jaw, the hands on the reins, careful and steady. "And what did you find?" she said. A long pause. "I found," he said, "that I am a man who is better with horses and harder ground than with drawing rooms, and that I can make something quiet and decent with my hands and my time." He paused again. "And then I found you." The last sentence arrived without preparation, without the careful composure that preceded everything else he said, and it sat in the carriage between them with the particular vulnerability of something that has been said before it was ready. Eleanor did not respond immediately. She looked at the road ahead. She thought about how she had sat in a church 2 months ago, in a white dress, watching her future walk away from her, and how she had taken the arm of a stranger, and how that stranger had turned out to be the most uncomplicated source of dignity she had ever encountered. And also, she was now understanding one of the largest land heirs in Virginia. "I need time," she said. "I know," he said. "Not because of the land," she said. "Because you hid it." "Yes," he said. "I know that too." They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of things avoided. The silence of things said that are still being absorbed. Eleanor went to bed that night and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about trust, and how it is not a single decision, but 100 small ones, and how she had been making them, without realizing it, for 2 months, in a plain farmhouse, with a man who chopped wood without performance, and dried dishes without being asked, and had looked at her across a room full of county society with the undefended expression of someone who had run out of ways to pretend he didn't care what she thought of him. She thought about Margaret's letter in the fire, Richard's letter in its envelope, Charlotte standing in the doorway in rose muslin with her careful winning smile. She thought about her father at the foot of the stairs and how his silence had been its own kind of answer. She thought, "I have survived every dishonest house I have ever lived in." She thought, "I will not let this one make me into someone who punishes honesty for arriving late." She was almost resolved when it arrived, the thing she had not seen coming. A carriage pulled into the yard the following morning before breakfast. A very fine carriage. Boston Springs lacquered with a coachman in proper livery. The kind of carriage that did not come down county roads to modest white farmhouses accidentally. Eleanor was at the kitchen window. She saw it before Nathaniel did. She watched the carriage door open. She watched the woman step out. She was perhaps 40, beautifully dressed in the kind of morning clothes that announce money without announcing effort, which is the most expensive kind of money. Dark hair, excellent posture, the controlled surveying calm of someone who has never needed to rush toward anything because everything has always eventually come to her. She looked at the farmhouse with the expression of someone confirming a disappointing suspicion. And then she looked up and found Eleanor at the kitchen window, and they looked at each other across the summer yard for 3 full seconds. Eleanor felt the fine hairs on her arms stand up. This woman was not a neighbor. She was not county society. She was something else entirely, wearing county road dust on a Boston carriage like a costume that didn't quite fit. Nathaniel came around the corner from the stable and stopped dead when he saw the carriage. He stopped dead, and in the 2 seconds before he recovered himself, Eleanor saw something she had not seen on his face in 2 months of watching him. Fear. Not physical fear. The worst kind. The fear of something you thought you had outrun arriving at your door in a lacquered carriage with good springs. The woman turned to him and said with the practiced warmth of someone who had learned that warmth was the most effective social weapon, "Nathaniel, you look well. The country agrees with you." "Lady Beatrice," Nathaniel said. His voice was exactly controlled. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" She tilted her head. "Your brother wrote to me. He said you had complicated things." Her eyes moved to the kitchen window, to Eleanor, and back to Nathaniel. "I see what he meant." Eleanor came out of the kitchen. She came out through the door and into the yard, and she walked toward them with the same level head and level stride she had used coming down the aisle of the Old South Meeting House, and she stopped at Nathaniel's side and looked at Beatrice Harlow and said pleasantly, "Good morning." Beatrice Harlow looked at her with an expression of polished, exquisite condescension. Not rude, much worse than rude. The expression of someone who has looked at something and immediately calculated what it is worth and is being gracious about the result. "You must be the governor's daughter," Beatrice said. "The one from the church. I've heard the story." "Most people have," Eleanor said. "I'm sure the telling improves with distance." Something shifted in Beatrice's eyes. Very small, a recalibration. She had not expected directness. "I'm an old friend of the family," Beatrice said. "The Graves family. Nathaniel and I have known each other since childhood." "How lovely," Eleanor said. "I came to speak with Nathaniel on some family business." Beatrice's smile stayed perfectly in place. "Privately, if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all," Eleanor said. She looked at Nathaniel. His jaw was set. His eyes moved between them with the look of a man who has just watched two rivers he thought were traveling in separate directions converge in his front yard. "Eleanor," he said. "I'll make coffee," she said, and went inside. She made coffee. She made it slowly with the precision of someone who is doing one thing with her hands while her mind is doing something else entirely. She could hear the low voices from the yard, not the words, just the cadence. Beatrice's voice measured musical moving through registers of warmth, and then something harder. Nathaniel's voice shorter, punctuating. The cadence of a man holding ground. After 20 minutes, the carriage door closed. After 22 minutes, the carriage moved out of the yard. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table. Nathaniel came inside. He sat down across from her and looked at the coffee cup and did not immediately speak. Eleanor waited. "She came on behalf of my brother," he said finally. "Edmund wants me to come home. He says the estate requires both of us. There are contracts expiring and political obligations that were made in both our names, and he can't hold them alone." "And what did you tell her?" Eleanor said. "I told her I needed time." "That seems to be the answer we're both giving," she said. He looked up. She looked at him. Between them, the coffee steamed, and the summer heat pressed in through the open door, and the yard was very quiet now that the lacquered carriage had taken its elegant wheels back to wherever it had come from. "Nathaniel," she said, "who is she, truly?" He held her gaze. "She was," he said carefully, "at one point what my family considered a suitable match." The sentence landed clean. Eleanor nodded once, slowly. "Does she know that point has passed?" Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked at her with complete, unguarded directness. "I have never given her any reason to believe otherwise. She doesn't behave like a woman who believes otherwise." "No," he said. "She doesn't." Eleanor picked up her cup. She drank her coffee. She thought with the particular clarity of a woman who has had every social weapon used against her at least once, that Beatrice Harlow was not finished. That a woman who arrived in a lacquered carriage on a county road to deliver a message she could have written in a letter was a woman who needed to see something for herself. Who came to assess a threat and returned having confirmed it was real. She thought Beatrice Harlow will be back, not to the farmhouse, somewhere worse, somewhere with an audience. She thought, I need to be ready for that, and she thought one thing more underneath all the rest, quiet and persistent, as a current moving under still water. She thought whatever Nathaniel Graves is carrying, and wherever it comes from, and whatever it costs him, he looked afraid when that carriage pulled into the yard, and the fear was not of the woman in it. The fear was of losing what he had here, of losing this. The plain table, the coffee, the kitchen, her. She set her cup down. She looked across the table at this man who had run from everything he was and built a quiet life on 40 acres and was now watching that quiet life get found by everything he'd run from. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "whatever comes next, you don't have to face it sideways. Not anymore." He looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. He didn't look away. That was the thing Eleanor carried with her into the days that followed that single unguarded moment across the kitchen table when Nathaniel Graves had looked at her without the careful composure he wore like a second coat, and had not looked away. It was a small thing. It was also, she was beginning to understand everything. The farmhouse settled back into its rhythms after Beatrice Harlow's carriage disappeared down the county road. Morning fires, garden hours, plain meals. The quiet industry of two people sharing a space with growing ease. But something had shifted underneath the surface of all that quiet, the way earth shifts after rain, not visibly, not dramatically, but in ways that change what grows next. Nathaniel worked longer hours than usual for the 3 days following Beatrice's visit. Eleanor recognized the pattern. She had used it herself, the deliberate filling of hours to keep a particular thought from finding room. She did not comment on it. She gave him the space, and she used her own hours to think. What she thought about mostly was Beatrice Harlow's face, not with jealousy. Eleanor was too precise an observer to mistake assessment for jealousy. What she kept returning to was the expression in Beatrice's eyes in that moment when Eleanor had walked out of the kitchen and into the yard, the recalibration, the small and quickly covered surprise. Beatrice had come expecting to find a problem she could manage. She had found something she hadn't accounted for. That meant she would return with a better plan. Eleanor had grown up watching Margaret Whitmore operate. She knew what a woman with resources and patience and no particular conscience looked like when she was between moves. She knew the silence before the next thing. She was in the middle of thinking about this sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink when Nathaniel came in from outside and set a letter in front of her. Not her name on it. His. Already opened. She looked up at him. "From Edmund," he said. "My brother." She waited. "He's coming," Nathaniel said. "Next week. He says it can't wait any longer." "Can it not?" Nathaniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He put his hands flat on the table, which she had learned was what he did when he was making himself stay in a conversation, instead of deflecting through it. "The Graves estate in Virginia," he said, "holds a set of political land contracts that come due for renewal in October. They require both my signature and Edmund's. If I don't sign, the contracts lapse. If they lapse, we lose 3 of the 4 county holdings." He paused. "Edmund has been managing it alone for 2 years. He's been patient. He's out of patience." "And if you sign," Eleanor said. "Then I go back," he said. "In some form. There's no signing those contracts without returning to Virginia, without resuming." He stopped. "Without resuming who I was." Eleanor was quiet. "Who were you?" she said. The question sat between them simply the way plain questions do when they are actually asking something complicated. Nathaniel looked at her. "The kind of man who sat in rooms like the ones your father sat in," he said. "The kind of man who made decisions about land and politics, and who had standing and who didn't." He paused. "The kind of man who got very tired of that world and walked away from it." "And now that world is walking back," Eleanor said. "Yes." She picked up her tea. Cold. She drank it anyway. "Nathaniel," she said, "when Edmund comes, I want to be there. I don't want to be managed around it. I don't want to be the person you're protecting from the conversation." He looked at her steadily. "Eleanor, I mean it," she said. "I have spent my entire life being handled, arranged around, considered a complication to be managed." Her voice was even, but the thing underneath it had edges. "I will not do that here, not with you." A pause. "All right," he said. "You'll be there." She nodded once. Drank the rest of the cold tea. Outside, the summer morning was doing what summer mornings did, indifferent to the particular weight gathering inside the farmhouse. And Eleanor thought, Edmund Graves is coming. Beatrice Harlow is already recalculating. And Charlotte Whitmore has never, not once in her life, left something alone that she thought she could still damage. Something was coming. She could feel it the way you feel weather. She just didn't know yet from which direction it would arrive. It arrived from a direction she hadn't expected. 4 days before Edmund Graves was due, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove sent a note to the farmhouse. Mrs. Hargrove managed the domestic arrangements of the Alderton property, the largest private estate in the immediate county, and the note was addressed with the particular formality of someone being careful about the legality of what they were proposing to Miss Eleanor Whitmore. The Alderton estate required seasonal assistance with their household accounts, the note said. Their regular account keeper had taken ill. They had heard through county channels that the note did not specify that Miss Whitmore had a capable head for figures and organization. Would she be available to assist for 2 to 3 weeks? Eleanor read the note twice. "The Alderton estate," she said to Nathaniel at dinner. He went still. Not obviously. A stillness most people wouldn't have caught. She caught it. "You know it," she said. "I know of it," he said. "What does that mean?" He set down his fork. "The Alderton family has certain connections to the Graves family. Historical ones. Business ones." He paused, choosing. "Old ones." "How old?" Old enough that the current Alderton doesn't remember how they started, he said. He just knows the name carries weight. Eleanor set the note on the table between them. Then why would they contact me, a woman they've never met living in circumstances Boston society considers scandalous to ask for help with their accounts? I don't know, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. I genuinely don't know, he said. I didn't arrange it. She held his gaze for a moment. He was telling the truth. She had become reliable enough at reading him to know when he wasn't, and this wasn't that. I'm going to go, she said. Eleanor. I'm going to go, she repeated. For 2 reasons. 1, we need the money. Do not argue with me about that. We need it, and I can earn it, and I'm going to. She watched him not argue about it, which required visible effort on his part. 2, I want to see what that house does with me. You said the name carries weight. I want to see what weight. He was quiet for a moment. Be careful, he said. I am always careful, she said. I've had a great deal of practice. The Alderton estate was 3 miles east, set back from the main road, in the way that old money sets things back, not hiding exactly, just requiring you to come to it rather than encountering it by accident. Eleanor rode the bay mare and arrived at the side entrance as instructed, and was received by Mrs. Hargrove herself, who was a brisk, competent woman in her 50s, who looked at Eleanor with the calibrated assessment of a woman who has run large households and knows immediately whether a new person will be useful or trouble. Apparently Eleanor passed because Mrs. Hargrove put a ledger in her hands within 10 minutes of her arriving. Previous 2 seasons, Mrs. Hargrove said. The summer accounts are the complicated ones. 3 harvest suppliers, 2 building contractors' household staff wages, and whatever Mr. Alderton decides to spend at the county auction, which is never predictable and always more than allocated. She paused. Can you work with that? Yes, Eleanor said. Good. Mrs. Hargrove turned to go, then stopped. Miss Whitmore, the staff here know who you are, or know enough. I won't have anyone troubled on account of it. You'll have no difficulty here. It was not a welcome exactly, but it was something a clearance, a statement of terms. Thank you, Eleanor said. She sat at the account desk and opened the ledger and went to work. The first thing she noticed was that the accounts were not actually as disorganized as Mrs. Hargrove had implied. They were confused in one specific way, a pattern of disbursements that were logged under general household, but that didn't correspond to any household expense Eleanor could identify. Small amounts, regular intervals. The kind of payments that if you were not looking for them, you would not see. And if you were looking for them, you would recognize immediately as payments designed not to be seen. She made a note and kept working. The second thing she noticed was the staff. Mrs. Hargrove had said she would have no difficulty. What Mrs. Hargrove had not said, what Eleanor understood only gradually across the first 2 days, was that the Alderton staff treated her with a deference that went beyond professional courtesy. Not obviously, not in ways that anyone watching from the outside would have easily categorized. Small things. The way Mrs. Hargrove's housekeeper, a quiet woman named Ruth, always ensured Eleanor's tea was fresh without being asked. The way 2 of the groundsmen, when they passed the window where Eleanor worked, touched the brims of their hats. The way the Alderton estate manager, a serious man named Calloway, who was responsible for all land operations, knocked on the account room door on the 2nd afternoon, and said with a careful deliberateness, If there's anything in those ledgers that gives you trouble, Miss Whitmore, anything at all, you come to me first. She looked at him. Why would I come to you? She said. He held her gaze for a moment. Because I know where all the records go back to, he said, and some of them go back further than this house's memory. He left before she could ask him what he meant. She thought about it all evening. She thought about the disbursements that weren't disbursements. She thought about Calloway's careful words. She thought about the way Ruth kept her tea hot without being asked the particular quality of that attentiveness, not servile, not professional, exactly. Something closer to known. As if they already knew who she was. As if someone had already told them. She arrived on the third morning and went directly to Calloway. "The ledger entries," she said, setting the account book open in front of him. What are these payments?" He looked at the page. His expression did not change, which was itself informative. "Those are land maintenance fees," he said. "They're not," Eleanor said. "Land maintenance fees are itemized here, here, and here. These are separate, quarterly, going back 6 years. She paused. "They correspond in amount to the kind of fee a property owner pays to a trust administrator, a holding fee." Calloway was quiet. "Calloway," she said, "I'm going to find out what these are. It will be easier for both of us if I find out from you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a decision. She could see it in the way his face settled, the way decisions look on a man's face when they've been approaching for some time and finally arrive. "Those payments," he said quietly, "go to a trust account registered in the county clerk's office. That account holds a land interest in this property, a silent interest. Has done for the last 6 years." "Whose interest?" Eleanor said. He looked at her steadily. "The trust is registered under the name Graves," he said. The word arrived the way words do when they are the last piece of a shape you've been assembling without knowing it, and the shape is suddenly completely clear. Eleanor stood very still. "Nathaniel Graves," she said. "The account predates his arrival here by 4 years, Calloway said. "It was established by his father. When the old man died, it transferred." He paused. "Mr. Nathaniel Graves holds a silent land interest in the Alderton estate. Has held it for 2 years since he came to the county. He's never activated it, never spoken on it, never told Mr. Alderton directly." "Does Mr. Alderton know?" Eleanor said. "Mr. Alderton knows the trust exists," Calloway said. "He doesn't ask too many questions about it. The Alderton family owes the Graves family a very old debt, the kind of debt that doesn't get paid, it just gets honored." Eleanor closed the ledger. She said, "Thank you, Calloway." She rode home. She did not go fast. She needed the time. The bay mare moved at an easy pace down the county road, and Eleanor sat straight in the saddle and thought about a man who had come to a county where no one knew his name, and had lived on 40 acres as a working man, and had never, not once, not by accident, not by design, mentioned that he held a silent land interest in the largest estate in the immediate county. She thought about what that meant. Not the land itself. The choice. The decision to have it and not use it. To be near it and not speak it. To sit across a plain kitchen table from a woman he was beginning to care about, and look her in the eye, and tell her partial truths, while the full truth sat in a county ledger 3 miles away. She thought about how it was possible to be both a good man and a dishonest one. How those two things could coexist in a person, and how exhausting it must be to carry both. She thought, "I am angry." She thought, "I am also not surprised," which makes the anger worse. She arrived at the farmhouse. Nathaniel was not in the yard. She put the mare in the stable herself, methodically taking longer than necessary, because she needed the time to decide what she was going to say and how she was going to say it before she went into that kitchen and said it. She decided on the truth. Plain and direct, the way he used words when he used them honestly. She found him in the front room reading. He looked up when she came in, and she saw him read her face. He was very good at reading her face by now, and whatever he saw there made him set the book down and straighten. "The Alderton accounts," she said. He was still. "There's a trust account in the county clerk's records," she said, "registered under the name Graves. Silent land interest in the Alderton property. Has been there for 6 years. Transferred to you when your father died." She paused. "Calloway told me. He didn't want to. I gave him no choice." Nathaniel said nothing. "You knew I was going there," she said. "You knew what I would be looking at. You let me go anyway." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you said you wanted to see what the house did with you. And I thought—" He stopped. "I thought if you found it yourself, it would be better than me telling you." "Better." She felt the word sharpen in her chest. "Better for whom?" "For you, because you wouldn't have to say it." "Eleanor." "No." Her voice came out controlled, but only just. "No, Do not say my name like that. Do not use my name as a place to pause while you compose the next careful sentence." She stopped, breathed. "Nathaniel, how much more is there? How many more ledgers and county offices and careful men with their hats in their hands? How much more am I going to find by accident, because you decided it was better for me to stumble on it than to be told?" He stood up. "The Virginia estate," he said. "The 4 county holdings. The trust account at Alderton. A partnership interest in 2 shipping concerns out of Charleston." He said it flat, rapid, every item landing clean. "And the house. Not this house. The other house. The one in Virginia that my family has held for 60 years, and that has 47 rooms, and a staff of 30, and a political history that goes back to the previous governor's administration." He stopped. "That is everything. That is all of it." The silence that followed was total. Eleanor stood in the middle of the front room of a modest white farmhouse and looked at the man across from her and did the full arithmetic. This time, the number she had been avoiding, and the number was staggering. 47 rooms, she said. "Yes." "And you've been living here, chopping wood and working horses and—" "Yes," he said, "because this is what I wanted. This is the life I wanted to find out if I could make." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it, not defiance, something raw. "And I found it. And then I found you. And I was afraid—" He stopped. "Say it," she said. He looked at her directly. "I was afraid that if you knew the full weight of it, you would stop seeing me and start seeing the name." The sentence landed differently than she expected. She stood with it, because she understood it. Not abstractly, viscerally from the inside. She understood what it was to be seen as a position rather than a person. To be assessed by what you represented rather than who you were. She had been the governor's daughter before she had been Eleanor. She had been a match before she had been a woman. She understood the specific, exhausting loneliness of being looked at and not seen. She understood it completely, and it did not make her less angry. "Nathaniel," she said carefully, "I hear what you're saying, and I believe you mean it." She paused. "But here is what you did not consider. You decided that for me. You decided what I would do with the information, and you made that decision in my place. And you hid the truth from me to protect yourself from an outcome you imagined." She looked at him steadily. "That is not trust, that is management. And I told you in the very beginning that I would not live in a managed house again." He held her gaze. He did not argue. "I know," he said. "You're right." "I know I'm right," she said. "I need to know what you're going to do about it." He moved then toward her, stopping 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the particular strain in his face that she had learned was what honesty cost him, when there was nothing left to hide it behind. "I am going to stop managing it," he said. "From this point, everything I know you know. Every letter, every account, everything Edmund brings with him when he comes." He paused. "And I am going to ask you, not require, not arrange, not decide for you. I'm going to ask you if you're willing to stand beside me when it arrives, because it is going to arrive, all of it. And it is going to be loud, and it is going to be complicated, and Beatrice Harlow is going to be part of it, and your family may well be part of it, and it is going to require—" He stopped. "It is going to require someone standing on ground that doesn't shift." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the church, the white dress, the laughter, and the arm offered without drama, without condition. She thought about cold tea and firewood, and a man who read her face before he spoke. She thought about 47 rooms in Virginia that she had never seen and did not want, and the one room in this plain farmhouse where she had slept better than she had slept in 23 years. "Edmund arrives when?" she said. "Thursday," Nathaniel said. "Then we have until Thursday," she said. She turned and went to the kitchen. She was putting the kettle on when she heard him follow her in. She did not turn around. He sat at the table without being asked. She made the tea. She set his cup in front of him and sat down across from him, and they looked at each other in the low afternoon light without performing anything. And Eleanor thought, this is the truest thing that has happened to me in 30 years of living. Not easy. Not simple. Not what she planned. True. She drank her tea. Thursday arrived the way inevitabilities always do, preceded by too much quiet. Edmund Graves was taller than Nathaniel Lighter-built, with the polished ease of a man who had never walked away from the life that had formed him. He arrived in a carriage that was significantly finer than anything the county road had seen this season, accompanied by a man who appeared to be a secretary, and a second man who appeared to be something between an advisor and a guard and did not introduce himself. Edmund embraced Nathaniel in the yard with the complicated warmth of brothers who have been angry with each other and are being generous about it. Then he looked at Eleanor. He had been briefed, she could tell. The particular way he looked at her, assessing, recalibrating, landing on something like surprised respect, was the look of a man whose information had not prepared him for the actual person. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I've heard a great deal about you." "I imagine you have," she said. "Very little of it from your brother." Edmund blinked, then laughed genuinely. "He said you were direct." "Did he say anything else?" Edmund looked at Nathaniel. Something moved between them, the shorthand of people who have known each other since childhood. "He said," Edmund replied carefully, "that you were the first person in a long time who made him feel like it was worth telling the truth." Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel was looking at the ground. "Well," she said, "he's getting better at it." They went inside. What followed was 3 hours of the kind of conversation Eleanor had grown up on the edges of: political, financial, contractual, laced with names and histories and obligations that went back generations. Edmund laid it out without softening it. The contracts, the timeline, the consequences of Nathaniel's continued absence, the specific political relationships that were fraying without his presence. Eleanor sat at the table and listened to all of it. Not as a visitor, not as a woman being tolerated at the edge of men's business. She sat as someone who had decided she was in the room, and her presence in the room was a fact, and facts did not require permission. Twice, Edmund addressed her directly, once about the Alderton connection, which he clearly knew about, and once about her own family's political position under Governor Whitmore, which told her that Edmund had been thorough in his preparation. She answered both questions plainly without apology, and Edmund listened with the expression of a man revising a conclusion he had already drawn. Near the end, Nathaniel said, "I'll sign the contracts." Edmund was quiet. "With conditions," Nathaniel said. "I need a month, and I will not be relocating to Virginia permanently. The Graves interest can operate through representatives for its regular business. I'll return for the political obligations as required. But this—" He stopped. He looked at Eleanor. "This is where I live." Edmund looked at Eleanor too. Then he looked back at his brother with the specific expression of a man who has come a very long way with a very complicated argument and has just found that he has lost it to something he hadn't planned to lose it to. "A month," Edmund said. "A month," Nathaniel confirmed. Edmund nodded slowly. Then, almost despite himself, he said, "She'll go with you to Virginia." The question was directed at Nathaniel, but they both looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back at both of them and thought about 47 rooms she hadn't seen, and a name she hadn't claimed, and a road that was going to lead somewhere much louder and more complicated than a white farmhouse on 40 acres. She thought about Beatrice Harlow's lacquered carriage and Charlotte's rose muslin, and her father at the foot of the stairs with his hands empty. She thought, "I have been standing on shifting ground my entire life, and I have not fallen yet." She looked at Nathaniel. She said, "That depends entirely on whether he keeps his word." Nathaniel held her gaze. "I will," he said. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed him completely, and the belief sat in her chest like something that could break her wide open, and she had not felt anything like that in 30 years, and she was not at all sure she was ready for what came next. But she was certain of one thing. She would not miss it. Edmund left the following morning. He shook Nathaniel's hand in the yard with the grip of a man who has finally gotten what he came for and is smart enough not to push for more. He looked at Eleanor one last time before he climbed into the carriage, and what was in his face was not the assessment of the night before. It was something closer to acknowledgement. The look of a man who has recalibrated and is honest enough to show it. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "For what it's worth, my brother has not written me a single letter in 2 years that did not mention you. Before you were you, I mean. Before your name was in it." He paused. He wrote about a woman he'd seen handle herself in a room full of people who wanted her to fall apart. He wrote about it 3 separate times. Eleanor held his gaze. "He never told me that." "No," Edmund said. "He wouldn't." He glanced at Nathaniel with the particular expression of brothers who have been exasperating each other since childhood. "He's better at admiring things than saying so." The carriage moved out of the yard. Eleanor stood beside Nathaniel and watched it go, and thought about 3 letters she had never seen written by a man sitting alone in a farmhouse, writing about her to the only person he trusted with the unguarded version of himself. She did not say anything about it, but she carried it. The month that followed was the quietest and the most complicated of Eleanor's life, which was saying something given the summer she'd already had. On the surface, everything was the same. Morning fires, the garden, the plain meals and the evening conversations that had become without either of them formally deciding, so the part of the day both of them moved toward. But underneath the surface, everything was in motion. She could feel it the way you feel a river's current when you're standing still in it, not turbulent yet, but moving, building headed somewhere that was going to require all of her footing. Nathaniel was different after Edmund's visit. Not dramatically, not in ways a stranger would notice. But Eleanor was not a stranger anymore, and she noticed. He stopped carrying his letters to the inside pocket of his coat and left them instead on the kitchen table for her to see. He showed her the contracts Edmund had brought, spread them on the table one evening after dinner, and walked her through each one, not explaining condescendingly, but the way you explain something to someone whose opinion you intend to take seriously. He asked what she thought. She told him. He listened in the way that meant he was actually changing his thinking rather than waiting for her to finish. It was the most intimate thing that had happened between them. More intimate than the evening he'd told her about his mother. More intimate than the moment in the yard when she'd seen the fear on his face before he composed it away. Because this was not a moment of accidental vulnerability. This was a choice. A deliberate, ongoing choice to let her in. Eleanor understood the weight of it. She did not take it lightly. What she also understood with the clear-eyed precision of a woman who had been watching the horizon for incoming weather for 2 solid months was that the quiet was about to end. It ended on a Tuesday. She was at the Alderton estate finishing the final week of the account work when Mrs. Hargrove came to the door of the account room with an expression that had something in it Eleanor had not seen on Mrs. Hargrove's controlled face before. Discomfort. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "there are visitors in the front hall." "What visitors?" Mrs. Hargrove paused. "Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, Miss Charlotte Whitmore, and Lady Beatrice Harlow." The 3 names landed in the room like 3 stones dropped in sequence. Eleanor set down her pen. She sat still for 3 seconds, which was all she allowed herself. 3 seconds to feel the full weight of it. The deliberate coordination of those 3 women arriving together at a house Eleanor was working in, which meant someone had told them where she would be. 3 seconds to let the anger move through her cleanly, because anger was useful when it was clean and dangerous when it wasn't. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and said, "Please tell them I'll be with them shortly." She took 5 minutes. She used them to finish the ledger entry she'd been working on because the accounts were due, and she was not going to leave work incomplete because Margaret Whitmore had decided to stage an entrance. Then she walked to the front hall. They were arranged, the 3 of them, in the way that women arrange themselves when they have planned the arrangement. Margaret Central composed in her best visiting clothes the gray silk that she wore when she needed to be taken seriously. Charlotte to her right, lovely and pale green, with the expression she wore when she was following her mother's lead and enjoying it. Beatrice Harlow to Margaret's left, elegant, and still wearing the particular calm of a woman who considers herself to be the most significant person in any room she enters. Eleanor walked into the hall and stopped at a distance that was respectful but not deferential. and looked at all three of them and said nothing. Margaret spoke first. "Eleanor, you look well." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "This is unexpected." "We were in the county," Margaret said, which was transparently untrue. "We heard you were here. We thought it only right to call." "How considerate," Eleanor said. Charlotte's eyes moved around the room with bright cataloging interest. "The Alderton estate is beautiful, isn't it? Are you working here?" "I'm managing their seasonal accounts," Eleanor said. "Yes." The pause that followed had a texture to it, the particular texture of three people deciding which weapon to use first. Beatrice Harlow used it. "Miss Whitmore," she said with a warmth so precisely calibrated, it was nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. "I hope you don't mind my saying I've been concerned about you. Since my visit to Mr. Graves's property, your situation seems—" She paused delicately. "Complicated." "Most situations worth being in are," Eleanor said. "Of course," Beatrice smiled. "Though I wonder if you fully understand the nature of Mr. Graves's obligations, his family history, his existing commitments." The smile held steady. "There are things about Nathaniel that I imagine he has not yet told you." "There were," Eleanor said. "He's told me now." A beat. Beatrice's smile did not waver, but something behind it shifted. "Has he?" she said. "The Virginia estate," Eleanor said. "The 4-county holdings, the Alderton trust interest, the Charleston shipping concerns, the contracts Edmund brought last week." She held Beatrice's gaze without expression. "Yes, he's told me." The silence in the hall was total. Margaret's composure flickered just once, just briefly, the way a candle flickers in a draft. Charlotte's bright cataloging eyes went from Eleanor to Beatrice and back again, with the expression of someone watching a game whose rules she thought she knew shift into something new. Beatrice Harlow looked at Eleanor for a long, measured moment. And then, because she was genuinely intelligent and knew when a position had been outflanked, she changed direction entirely. "Then you know," Beatrice said, "that the Graves family has a long-standing social position, political relationships, expectations about the kind of woman who would be appropriate to that position." She paused. "A woman with a family name, a standing, a history that does not include being walked out of a church to public laughter." Eleanor felt the sentence land. She let it land. She did not move away from it. "Lady Harlow," she said quietly, "you are describing requirements for a transaction, not a marriage." She paused. "And you are describing them to the wrong woman. I am not applying for a position. I am making a choice. Those are different things. I understand the difference. I believe you do too." Beatrice held her gaze. It was Margaret who broke it. "Eleanor." Her voice had shed its social polish and become something more direct underneath. "You are my husband's daughter. Whatever you may think of me, I am not indifferent to your welfare." Eleanor looked at her stepmother. This woman who had run the Whitmore household with the precision of a general and the warmth of a climate, who had rearranged Eleanor's room and Charlotte's future and Samuel Whitmore's attention with equal efficiency, and never once appeared to find it cruel. "Margaret," Eleanor said, "tell me one thing, and tell me truthfully." She paused. "Did you know about Richard and Charlotte before the wedding?" The silence stretched. Charlotte made a small sound. Margaret's face went through something. Something complicated and old, and not entirely without guilt. "I knew they had an attachment," Margaret said finally. "I believed it would pass." "You believed it was convenient for it to pass," Eleanor said. "There's a difference." Margaret said nothing. "I know the difference," Eleanor said. "I've always known. I just wanted to hear you say something true." She looked at all three of them. Margaret with her complicated guilt, Charlotte with her flickering discomfort, Beatrice with her recalibrating intelligence. "I'm going to go back to work now. The accounts are due by Friday. If any of you require anything further, I'll be at the farmhouse." She turned and walked back toward the account room. She was almost to the door when Charlotte said, "Eleanor." She stopped, did not turn. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said. "About the church, I'm—" A pause. The sound of someone finding a sentence that is true rather than useful. "I'm actually sorry." Eleanor stood still. She thought about 23 years of a house that had arranged itself around Charlotte's ease and her own inconvenience. She thought about rose muslin and a smile like a drawn blade. She thought about what it cost a person to say a true thing when they had spent their whole life saying the convenient one. She turned around. Charlotte was looking at her with an expression Eleanor had never seen on her half-sister's face. No performance in it, no management. Just a young woman who had done a damaging thing and had not until this moment fully stood in front of it. "I know," Eleanor said. "I believe you." She went back to work. She finished the accounts. She rode home. She told Nathaniel what had happened with the flat, efficient brevity of someone reporting facts, and he listened without interrupting. And when she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Beatrice will not stop there." "No," Eleanor said. "She won't." "She'll find another venue," he said. "Somewhere with more witnesses." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I've been thinking about that." And Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen table. "I think we stop waiting for her to choose the ground," she said. "I think we choose it ourselves." He looked at her steadily. "What do you mean?" "Edmund said the contracts require your presence at a formal signing," she said. "Political occasion, witnesses, the county magistrate and at least 2 senior officials." She paused. "When is it?" 3 weeks, he said. "At the Halcott estate." "Then that's where it happens," she said. "All of it, in the open, in front of everyone." He held her gaze. "Eleanor, that room is going to have your father in it. Richard Alden's family, Beatrice, half of Boston society." "I know," she said. "And you want to walk into it." "I want to walk into it beside you," she said. "Not behind you, not as a secret or a complication, beside you." She paused. "If that is what you want." He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was warm. The evening was quiet. Outside somewhere a horse shifted in the stable and the summer dark held everything in it patient and still. "That is what I want," he said. "It's the only thing I'm certain of." "Then we go," she said. "And we do not manage it. We do not arrange it or soften it or wait to see which way the room falls. We walk in and we let it be what it is." He nodded once. "Yes," he said. The 3 weeks that followed were the closest thing to peace Eleanor had experienced since the morning she had packed 2 bags on Beacon Hill and ridden east. Not because things were simple, they were not. Letters arrived. Social pressure arrived in various forms and from various directions. Beatrice Harlow was visible at 2 county events that Eleanor heard about secondhand, and visible in a way that suggested active campaign rather than coincidence. But in the farmhouse in the hours that were theirs, something had clarified. They talked the way people talk when they have stopped managing each other. Nathaniel told her about Virginia, not the estate in its financial and political dimensions, but the place itself. The particular light on the Blue Ridge in October. His mother's garden. The way his father had walked the property boundary every Sunday morning for 40 years as a kind of prayer. Eleanor told him about her own mother, which she rarely did, because the memories were early and soft, and she protected them from air that might not be kind to them. She told him about a woman who had laughed easily and read poetry aloud, and had called Eleanor by a name no one else used, a small private name, which Eleanor had not spoken to another living person since she was 4 years old. She told it to Nathaniel on a Tuesday evening, and he listened without moving, without offering anything back immediately, just holding the weight of it, the way you hold something precious that someone has trusted you with. Then he said quietly, "She would have liked this house." Eleanor looked at him. "The north room," he said. "The morning light. She would have liked it." Eleanor said nothing, but she reached across the table and put her hand over his, just briefly, just for a moment, and he turned his hand and held hers. And between them, something that had been approaching for months arrived without ceremony, without drama, without the performance that neither of them had ever had patience for. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, she thought, everything. The morning of the Halcott gathering arrived with the particular clarity of a late September day. The summer heat finally broke in the air, carrying something crisp and decisive in it. Eleanor put on the deep blue wool. She dressed her hair with more precision than usual, and then reconsidered and softened it slightly, because she was not going to war. She was going to be herself in a room full of people who had opinions about who she was, and being herself was more effective than any armor. Nathaniel was in the front room when she came down. He was wearing the good coat again. He was standing at the window looking out at the yard, and when he heard her, he turned and looked at her, and the thing in his face was not composure. It was not the careful, managed steadiness she had learned to see through. It was simpler than that. It was a man looking at a woman he loved and knowing it and showing it without the performance of managing it. Eleanor walked to him. She straightened his collar, not because it needed it, but because she needed the moment, the ordinary domestic intimacy of it. "Ready," she said. "No," he said. "Let's go." They rode together. The Halcott estate was fuller than the summer gathering, because this was formal business, and formal business drew the county's weight. Carriages in the yard, men in their good coats on the steps, women in the hall, the organized noise of people who know they are witnessing something that will be discussed afterward. Eleanor felt the room change when they walked in, not dramatically, not all at once. The way a room's temperature changes first, the people nearest the door, a turning, a recognition, a recalibration. Then the ripple outward person to person, the way sound moves. She walked beside Nathaniel, and she did not look at anyone in particular, and she did not perform anything. She was simply there, and being simply there was the most powerful thing she had learned to do. She saw her father across the room. Governor Samuel Whitmore was standing with 3 other men, and he saw her at the same moment she saw him, and the expression on his face moved through several things very quickly, shock and guilt, and something that was almost the thing she had waited for her whole life. She looked at him steadily. She did not cross the room to him. She let him come to her. He did. He crossed the room slowly with the deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it. He stopped in front of her. He looked at Nathaniel briefly, then back at Eleanor. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The noise of the room moved around them. "I should have," he began. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He looked at her. His eyes, she noticed, were red at the edges. Samuel Whitmore, who she had not seen cry in 23 years, was holding something back that he had probably been holding back for months. "I handled it wrongly," he said. "I knew something was wrong between Charlotte and Richard, and I said nothing because it was easier." His voice was low, controlled with a crack in it. "You deserved better than that. You deserved a father who chose you." Eleanor stood very still. She thought about what she had cried for on the summer road 2 months ago. Not Richard Alden, but this. This sentence. This admission. This late from this man who had been easier to love at a distance than to need up close. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." "I'm sorry, Eleanor." She looked at him. This large, white-haired man who had been a governor and a father and had been better at one than the other. Who had stood at the foot of a staircase with his hands empty and said nothing when he should have spoken, and was now in the middle of a crowded room saying the thing 23 years too late, and meaning every word of it. "I know," she said. "I believe you." She did not say it was all right, because it wasn't entirely, and she was not in the business of saying things that weren't true. But she held his gaze, and she let the grief of it be real, and she let the forgiveness begin, not finish, begin. And that was what she had. Her father looked at Nathaniel. "You're Graves," he said, not hostile, assessing. "Yes, sir," Nathaniel said. "The Graves family from Virginia." "Yes." Her father looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You walked into that church and offered my daughter your arm when no one else would." He paused. "I don't forget things like that." "No, sir," Nathaniel said. "I don't imagine you do." Her father nodded once. Then he stepped back and returned to the men he'd been standing with, and Eleanor watched him go and breathed. The formal proceedings began. The contracts were read, the magistrate presiding with the careful authority of a man who understands that what is happening is larger than the documents in his hands. Edmund sat to Nathaniel's left. Eleanor sat to Nathaniel's right, which caused a minor ripple of attention from the senior officials present, and which no one, not the magistrate, not Edmund, not the senator who had spoken to Nathaniel at the summer gathering, had any visible objection to. It was the seating that did it. Not the signing itself, which was formal and proper and without incident. The seating, because in that room, in that arrangement before a county magistrate and half a dozen political men, Eleanor Whitmore sitting beside Nathaniel Graves at the signing table was a statement, not announced, not argued for, simply true and visible and requiring no explanation. Beatrice Harlow was in the room. Eleanor had known she would be. She had seen her when they entered, standing with a group near the far wall, composed and elegant and watchful. She had said nothing and done nothing in the hall before the proceedings, which meant she was saving it. She saved it for afterward. When the formal business concluded and the room dissolved into conversation, Beatrice crossed toward them with the precision of a woman who has decided that if she is going to make a move, she will make it where it will be seen. She stopped in front of Eleanor. She did not look at Nathaniel. She looked at Eleanor. And in her face, there was no social smile, no calibrated warmth. Just a woman straight on, without the costume. "You won," Beatrice said. Simply, flatly, without decoration. Eleanor looked at her. "This wasn't a competition." "It was," Beatrice said. "You may not have entered it as one. I did." A pause. "I entered it believing I knew what Nathaniel needed and that I was the correct answer to it." She held Eleanor's gaze. "I was wrong about both things. You are neither the woman I expected nor the problem I thought you were." Eleanor held the silence for a moment. "Lady Harlow," she said, "I understand wanting something you believed was yours. I understand the particular grief of that." She paused. "I don't wish you harm. I never did." Something moved through Beatrice's expression. Brief, genuine. The look of a woman who has been answered with more grace than she expected and doesn't quite know how to hold it. She inclined her head once in a movement that was not quite a bow, but contained the weight of one. Then she walked away. Nathaniel said quietly at Eleanor's side, "I did not expect that." "Neither did I," Eleanor said. They stood in the middle of the room that had organized itself around them, that had witnessed the signing and the seating and the father and the rival, that would talk about this day for the rest of the season in parlors and carriages, all the way to Boston. And Eleanor thought, this is what it looks like. The thing you don't plan for. The thing that arrives because you chose it over and over in small, unwitnessed moments in plain kitchens and summer yards and county roads. This is where those choices land. Charlotte appeared at the edge of her vision. Not Margaret. Just Charlotte standing a careful distance away, with her hands folded, and something on her face that Eleanor recognized as the particular expression of a person who wants to speak, and is not certain they have the right to. Eleanor made the distance shorter. She walked to Charlotte. Charlotte looked at her with her mother's careful face and her own uncertain eyes, and said, "I don't expect things to be the same." "No," Eleanor said. "They won't be." "But I just wanted you to know that I meant it. What I said at Alderton." Charlotte's voice was lower than usual. "I didn't understand what I was doing to you. I told myself a story about it that made it easier, and I kept telling it until I believed it." She stopped. "I don't believe it anymore." Eleanor looked at her half-sister, this young woman who had everything Eleanor hadn't, and had still reached for more. "Charlotte," she said, "I grew up in the same house you did. I know what Margaret's voice sounds like in your head when you're making decisions. I know how much easier it is to take than to stand back." She paused. "You are not your mother. You don't have to keep being her." Charlotte's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together hard, the way you do when you are not going to cry in a room full of county society. "Will you?" she started. Stopped. Is there a way to—" "Yes," Eleanor said. "There's a way. It will take time, and it will require you to keep meaning what you said." She held her gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Charlotte said. "Then we'll find it," Eleanor said. She walked back to Nathaniel. He looked at her. "How are you?" "Tired," she said honestly. "And very, very clear." "Clear about what?" She looked at him. At this man who had offered her his arm in a church full of laughter, and had hidden half his life from her, and had learned slowly, imperfectly, honestly to stop. Who had said she was the only person in a long time who made him feel like the truth was worth telling, and had then proven he meant it one hard letter at a time. She looked at him, and she thought 2 months ago I had nothing, and now I have more than I know how to hold, and I did not plan any of it, and I would not trade a single day of it. "I'm clear about this," she said. "About here. About what I'm choosing." He held her gaze. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said quietly, "you are the most decided woman I have ever met." "Yes," she said, "I am. Make sure you remember that." Something broke open in his expression. Then the last of the careful composure, the last of the managed steadiness, giving way to something that was simply fully undefendedly his. He took her hand, not dramatically, not with performance, the way he had done everything with her directly without asking for anything back. He took her hand in the middle of the room and held it, and she held his, and the room moved around them, and the season shifted outside, and the summer was finally fully over. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had walked out of a church with nothing but 2 steady feet and the absolute refusal to be what that room decided she was, stood in the place she had found by choosing it beside the man she had found, by not flinching, and understood with the complete, unshakable certainty of someone who has paid the full price for a thing and knows its worth, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because it was easy, because it was true, and truth, she had learned, was the only ground that did not give way beneath you when everything else decided to fall. She held his hand, and she did not let go.